I'm Jennifer Marie Keller. Welcome to my Diary of a Painter. I went out plein air painting last weekend, and again I decided to try my hand at another watercolor. I was at Rockaway Beach in Pacifica. It was absolutely beautiful there, a little chilly, but really epic scenery. So in this clip you can see the spot where I'm looking. So instead of doing the ocean, my focus was instead on the cliffs right by the shoreline. You can see my setup, and at this stage I had put in the pencil drawing, so the really basic lines of the composition. I really liked seeing the shadows that went down the cliffs, and then the top part, that top plane of the cliffs is lighter, and then with the grouping of clumps of trees. And this is the finished piece. If you look at the sky, you can see that it's mostly overcast, but there's a few blue spots in the sky. So the light was changing just a bit, not too drastically though. It mostly stayed pretty overcast. Like I keep saying, watercolor is still just such a new medium for me. It's really fun to play with, and every time I go out and play with it, I'm reminded how differently watercolor acts than oil paint. It just takes a completely different way of thinking and planning how you're going to paint your painting. But it's just so much fun. I like that this is feeling purely like a hobby. Like I go out and I'm just having fun with it and just exploring how this new medium behaves and acts. I'm also finding with watercolor that I really have to go with the flow, literally with the flow of the water on the paper. And I'm finding that it behaves differently, the watercolor, with the wetness or dryness of the paper, and I can't fight that. And I just need more experience to try to better understand or to predict how the watercolor is going to behave on the paper. So the watercolor will act differently if the paper is really dry, or if the paper is wet, or if the paper is really, really wet. So for example, for this piece right here with the cliff, I was getting that in and trying to get the right darkness, the value that I wanted, a dark value for the cliffs with the shadow part. And I had been working on it a bit and kind of keep layering paint on. And so the paper was pretty wet, and then I didn't notice that. So this is the shoreline of the ocean coming up on the bottom parts of the cliff. And it's supposed to, or originally, I wanted the white of the paper to show here, so it'd be a light value like the sky. And then if there was a really light value with these strokes, it's kind of showing the movement of the water. But as I was painting the cliffs, I didn't see that drips had started to form along here. So I took my finger and I tried to wipe it off, but then it just like stained and pressed in the paper. And then I kept still working further on this and adding more darker value to it, and then it just would continue to drip down here. So in the future, or if I were to do this again, I would have waited for this to dry and then put another layer over it to darken it. So I'm getting used to seeing how the watercolor behaves on the paper depending on how wet or dry it is. And I'm also, when I was working on this, I'm also trying to just see how watercolor behaves on the paper and not try and have like such a tight control over it like I can with oil paint. And so seeing how different mark making and bleeding appears and how that can be really interesting. Mark making, there's some that are drier, kind of scratchier, and then some also that are more fluid, and you can see it kind of bleeding into the paper, and how in some parts it'll have kind of a water ring around the shape, and how that can be interesting. And so this is not a great painting, and the goal wasn't to make a great painting, but the goal is with something new like this that's completely brand new to me, like watercolor. And watercolor plein air has its own set of challenges as well, but it's just getting used to the medium and how the medium behaves with different circumstances. And just with this experimenting, I'm really liking the mark making, the starkness of mark making that you can get with watercolor. When I do my oil paintings in my studio or plein air, I really like to get a nice variety of brushstrokes. And with oil paint, when you're putting brushstrokes down, I like to have some brushstrokes that are very thin, and then others that have a different variation of thickness to them. And so with oil paint, when you're putting down a thick brushstroke, you're getting the impression of the lines scraping, or the bristles scraping through the paint. And so you're literally getting this texture that you can feel. With watercolor though, the interesting thing is that it's literally, the brushstrokes are just literally pigment on paper, so you don't have that 3D effect at all. But you can still see in different areas the scratchiness of the bristles on the paper, or not, where it's just like this shape that you've created with the brush. And so I like that starkness to it, that you don't have that 3D effect with it, brushstroke wise. And so I'm thinking the next time I go out, I might do another painting like this where it's fairly monochrome and I'm more looking at the values and different mark making that's making up the painting, rather than worrying about so much color. And I think I'm naturally drawn to watercolor images like that anyway, where it's mostly monochrome and it's just the value. I mean, this was my last painting, and I think I'm just choosing subjects that don't have a lot of color in them, or at least I'm interpreting them more monochrome. And so while I find this really fun and it's just like a fun hobby to play around with, I definitely can see with being able to control finding different brushstrokes that I can be putting down, and then just be focusing on value and drawing, how this could really influence my oil painting in very interesting ways as well. I'm Jennifer Marie Keller. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel. I also have all my other social media links listed down below. You can also sign up for my monthly newsletter by going to my website at jennifermariekeller.com. If you scroll down on that first page, you'll see where you can put in your information.